I first noticed her properly one warm evening, just as the sun was slipping low enough to stain the sky with streaks of amber and rose. I had seen her before, of course, passing glances from my kitchen window or brief nods across the driveway. But that night was different. That night, she wasn't simply the neighbor. She was the widow next door, alone yet strangely luminous, standing among her rose bushes as if the garden itself leaned toward her. Her movements carried a quiet grace, deliberate but unhurried. I could tell she had done this many times, tending to the flowers, trimming back the climbing vines, brushing soil from her hands. Yet even in those simple actions, there was something compelling. Something about the way her shoulders squared against the fading light, the way her hair caught the glow of the last rays and shimmered with hints of silver. She didn't look fragile. She looked steady, strong. And yet, when her eyes lingered on a flower longer than they needed to, I thought I caught a trace of loneliness etched into the line of her mouth. I should have gone back inside. I told myself not to stare, but I found my feet carrying me across the lawn, casual as I could manage, as if I were simply heading toward the mailbox. When I greeted her, my voice sounded younger than I intended, unsure, even. She looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw her properly. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't loud, wasn't trying. It lived in her composure, the way she stood so naturally in her own skin. She gave me a smile, small but unforced, and it was enough to make my chest tighten. "Evening," I said, lifting a hand in a clumsy sort of wave. Her smile widened just a fraction, and she tilted her head slightly. "Evening," she replied, her voice low, carrying the husky warmth of someone who had spoken softly to herself more often than to others. It was nothing more than a simple exchange. 2 words back and forth. Yet something in the pause that followed made it linger. The air between us seemed to hold on to that smile, that look. The scent of jasmine drifted from her garden, and for a moment, I was caught, not just by her presence, but by the feeling that she was both entirely here and somewhere far away. I wanted to say something else, to ask about the roses, or if she'd lived here long. Instead, I found myself silent, watching as she brushed a smudge of dirt from her palm with the other hand, her movements slow, thoughtful. She didn't seem to mind the quiet, though. If anything, she met it with a kind of calm acceptance, as if she was used to moments stretching out unfilled. Finally, she gave me one last look, her eyes steady but not unkind, and nodded once before returning to her work. I stood there a second longer, then turned toward my mailbox, though I didn't need the mail. I just needed an excuse. That night, when I closed my blinds, the scent of jasmine still clung to me, and so did the memory of her smile. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw her again, though this time not across the fence or out in the garden. I was at the little corner shop 2 streets over, the kind of place where the aisles are narrow and the shelves lean under the weight of too many things packed too close together. I had come in for something simple, coffee beans, and maybe a loaf of bread. I wasn't expecting her to be there. Yet when I turned the corner by the tea section, there she was. She wore a light gray sweater that seemed made for cooler evenings, her hair pulled back loosely, a few strands falling forward in a way that softened her face. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her without her garden gloves and the setting sun at her back. She noticed me first. Her lips curved into that quiet smile, the same one she'd given me over the fence days earlier. It had the same effect, stopping me just long enough to feel my heartbeat shift. "Shopping for essentials too?" she asked lightly, holding up a basket that already held a bottle of wine, some fruit, and a box of tea. I nodded, lifting my own basket. "Coffee. Always coffee." She chuckled, the sound low, warm. It wasn't laughter for show. It came from somewhere easy, unguarded. I found myself smiling before I even realized it. We ended up side by side in the aisle, making small talk. She told me she liked tea in the evenings, something calming to wind down with. I admitted I wasn't much of a tea drinker, but had always meant to try. She gave me a look then, half amused, half thoughtful, and picked up a box of chamomile, holding it out to me. "Try this one. It's gentle. Even stubborn coffee drinkers survive it." Her hand brushed mine when she passed it over, just the briefest contact, but enough for me to feel a faint spark, sharp and delicate all at once. She didn't seem startled by it. though a slight curve lingered at the corner of her lips as if she'd noticed too. We wandered together toward the checkout. Our baskets clinked softly as we walked, and I found myself listening more to the rhythm of her voice than to the words themselves. She had a way of making even simple things, whether she was talking about her preference for fresh bread over packaged or which fruits were worth buying at this shop, sound like pieces of a life she had carefully built. At the counter, we stood close. Too close for strangers, maybe, but neither of us moved away. The scent of her perfume was faint, like something floral but restrained. I caught myself inhaling more deeply than I should. When she paid, she glanced back at me and said softly, "Maybe you'll tell me if the tea passes your approval." Her tone was playful, but her eyes carried something else, an openness, maybe, or an invitation so subtle I could have missed it if I wasn't looking for it. I nodded, promising without words that I'd try. As we walked out together, bags in hand, the late afternoon light stretched across the street, and for a moment, I thought of how strangely natural it felt. Us leaving the store side by side, like two people who had done it countless times before. It was nothing more than errands, nothing more than groceries. But as she turned toward her car and I toward mine, I realized I was already looking forward to the next coincidence. It became a rhythm, though neither of us had planned it. By the time the sun dipped low and the street lamps began their steady glow, I'd often find myself outside, lingering in my backyard under the excuse of watering the grass or adjusting something on the porch. And almost without fail, she would be there too, pruning a rose bush, carrying out a mug of tea, or simply sitting on her back steps as the day bled into evening. The wooden fence that separated our yards suddenly felt less like a divider and more like a bridge. We would meet there, leaning across the worn planks, our words quiet enough to belong to the dusk. At first, the conversation stayed light. She asked about my work, where I grew up, and what I did with my spare time. I kept my answers honest but simple, watching how her eyes softened when I mentioned small things, a book I was reading, or how I cooked to clear my head. She listened like it mattered. Eventually, the tone shifted. Not all at once, but slowly, like the way twilight creeps in without you realizing the sky has gone from gold to indigo. She told me about her late husband one evening, her voice steady, her fingers tracing idle lines into the wood of the fence as if it gave her something to hold on to. She didn't say much, just that he had been kind, that they had shared a quiet life, that sometimes the house still felt too big. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix anything or offer empty comforts. I just listened, and the silence between us became something sacred. "I'm sorry," I said finally, when her words fell away. And I meant it. Her gaze lifted to mine then. There was no pity in my voice, no awkwardness, only the truth. Something in her expression shifted, softening, as if she recognized that I wasn't afraid to sit with her in that space where the grief still lived. The crickets sang in the hedges, and a cool breeze lifted a strand of her hair across her cheek. For a heartbeat, I wanted to reach out, to brush it away, but I held back. It wasn't the right time. Instead, I smiled gently. "The roses look beautiful, by the way. You've clearly got the better green thumb." Her laugh was quiet, but real. A laugh that seemed to rise from a place that hadn't been touched in a while. "You'd be surprised," she said. "Half the time I don't know what I'm doing. I just keep tending. And somehow, they bloom anyway." The words stayed with me longer than they should have. About the roses, yes, but also about her. We stood there until the porch lights flickered on automatically, washing the yard in a soft yellow glow. Her eyes caught the light, holding mine for longer than necessary, before she finally excused herself with a small nod. When she turned to go, I realized how much I already looked forward to the next evening. Not because of the roses, or the fence, or the habit of it, but because her voice, her presence, had become something my day felt incomplete without. It was one of those nights when the air felt alive, warm but softened by a gentle breeze that stirred the leaves in the trees above us. I had wandered outside after dinner, restless, and found myself leaning on the fence, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Her porch light clicked on, spilling golden light across her yard, and then she appeared, carrying a glass of wine. "There you are," she said, her voice carrying a teasing lilt as she walked closer. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your post." I smiled, resting my arms on the fence. I could say the same. You usually beat me out here. She laughed, a sound that had grown familiar but never lost its effect. She stopped just a few feet away, setting her glass on the fence post, and leaned in as though our conversations were secrets too delicate to share with the night. We talked easily, slipping between subjects, books we'd read, the strange quirks of neighbors down the street, even the weather. But beneath the flow of words, something else was happening. Her body angled closer, her laughter came softer, and her gaze lingered on me just a fraction longer than it used to. At one point, I teased her, lightly, carelessly, about how mysterious she seemed. You always give just enough to keep me guessing, I said, tilting my head. I never know what you're really thinking. Her eyes flashed with something unreadable. She leaned across the fence, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the glimmer of amusement there. She didn't speak right away, and the silence stretched until my heart pounded harder than I wanted to admit. Then she leaned even closer, so close I felt the warmth of her breath brush against my ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper, playful but edged with something more. You're trouble, and I like trouble. The words struck like a spark in dry grass, small but enough to set everything alight. My breath caught, my body rigid with the sudden charge in the air. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, low and deliberate, as if she knew exactly what effect they would have. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Forgot the fence between us, forgot the gap in years, forgot the voices in my head warning me to keep this neighborly and safe. All I knew was the closeness of her, the curve of her smile as she pulled back just slightly, watching me. I wanted to say something clever in return, but all that came out was a half laugh, shaky and softer than I intended. You shouldn't say things like that, I murmured. Her smile deepened, her hand brushing the top of the fence as if she were anchoring herself. Maybe not, she said, but I mean them. The night seemed to hush around us, even the crickets pausing as if to give her words room. I stood there, pulse racing, caught between moving closer and holding still, between stepping across the line or waiting for her to. Neither of us moved. Not yet, but something had shifted. The ground beneath us no longer felt the same, as though we both knew. From that whisper onward, there was no going back to ordinary conversations over the fence. The days after her whisper felt different, though neither of us acknowledged it out loud. Our conversations still happened by the fence, still carried laughter and the familiar rhythm we'd fallen into. But beneath it all was a tension we both carefully sidestepped. It was in the pauses, in the glances that lingered a heartbeat too long, in the way my words stumbled when I caught her smile. I couldn't get her voice out of my head. You're trouble, and I like trouble. The way she had leaned close, her breath brushing my ear, the warmth of her presence pressed so near to mine. It had been playful on the surface, but underneath, it had cracked something open in both of us. Yet the more I thought about it, the more the doubts crept in. She had lived a life, carried a history, endured a loss I could barely begin to imagine. She was older, more experienced, steady in ways I was still learning to be. What right did I have to intrude on that? What if this was nothing more than a passing curiosity for her, a moment of lightheartedness she had already forgotten? When we spoke again one evening, I noticed she carried the same hesitation. Her words came slower, her hands folding around a mug of tea like she needed its warmth to anchor her. At one point, she looked at me as if she were about to say something important, only to let the silence swallow it instead. I hope I didn't cross a line the other night, she said suddenly, her voice softer than usual. Her eyes flickered down to the rim of her cup, avoiding mine. The confession caught me off guard. I could feel the weight behind it, the careful guard she was raising again. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything. How I thought about her more than I should. How her smile lingered in my chest long after she turned away. How that whisper had replayed in my mind until it felt like part of me. But instead, I said carefully, no line crossed. Not for me. She exhaled, a faint smile tugging at her lips, but her shoulders didn't quite relax. Good, she murmured. I just sometimes forget myself. It's been a long time since I let someone get close enough to make me laugh like that. Her words should have encouraged me. Instead, they deepened the ache. I realized then how much she was holding back, how much of her heart was still guarded, tucked away behind years of loss and the fear of being vulnerable again. I rested my hand on the fence between us, not reaching for her, just placing it there. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. "So, take your time." Her eyes lifted then, meeting mine in the dim light. For a moment, the wall between us wasn't the wooden fence, but something deeper: fear, doubt, longing. And for a moment, I thought she might step through it. But she didn't. She only nodded, whispered a quiet "good night," and disappeared back into her house. I stayed outside longer than I needed to, the night cool against my skin, wondering if hesitation was going to be the very thing that unraveled whatever this was becoming. The sky warned us before it happened. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and dark, the kind that swallow the stars before the first drop of rain even falls. I had just settled onto my porch when I saw her out in her yard, hurriedly gathering the cushions from her patio chairs, her movements brisk but not nearly quick enough for the storm barreling in. The first rumble of thunder made me stand. By the time I jogged across the grass and leaned over the fence, fat raindrops had already begun to fall. "Need a hand?" I called out. She turned, strands of hair sticking to her cheek as the wind picked up. "I think the storm's winning this one," she laughed, her voice half drowned by the sudden downpour. Without waiting for permission, I vaulted the fence and landed in her yard. The rain was cold, stinging against my skin, soaking through my shirt in seconds. She looked startled at first, but then relief softened her expression as I grabbed the last of the cushions and shoved them under the patio awning. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat, I saw her clearly. Rain streaming down her face, her sweater clinging to her frame, her eyes bright with both surprise and something unspoken. She laughed again, breathless, and shook her head at me. "You didn't have to." Her words broke off as another gust of wind sent a spray of rain across us. Instinctively, I reached out, my hand steadying her arm. The contact was brief, but it anchored us in the chaos. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned closer, her hand catching the front of my shirt as if to balance herself. The storm raged, but for the first time in weeks, the tension between us broke, not with words, but with laughter. We stood there, drenched, helpless against the weather, and it felt strangely liberating. All the hesitation, the careful pauses, the whispered doubts, they washed away in the downpour. When the laughter finally subsided, we were both breathing hard, faces inches apart. She still had her hand fisted in my shirt, and I could feel the tremor of her breath against my chest. I didn't move, afraid that if I did, the moment would scatter like raindrops on glass. Then she closed the distance, not with a kiss, not yet, but with an embrace. Her arms slipped around me, her cheek pressing against my shoulder, her body warm despite the rain chilling us both. I wrapped my arms around her without thinking, holding her as tightly as I dared. The world felt quiet in that moment, even with thunder rolling above us. Her heartbeat thudded softly against me, steady and alive, and I realized how badly she must have needed to feel that. Not loneliness, not the ache of what she'd lost, but the simple warmth of another person holding her. When she finally pulled back, her smile was small but different, softer, braver. "Come inside," she whispered, "before the storm gets worse." And for once, neither of us hesitated. Her house smelled faintly of vanilla and old books, a comforting mix that greeted me the moment we stepped inside. The storm rattled against the windows, rain hammering the roof, but in here the air felt softer, warmer. She handed me a towel with a half-smile, as if embarrassed at the state we were in, hair dripping, clothes clinging, shoes squeaking against her wooden floor. "Sorry about the mess," she murmured, pushing damp strands of hair away from her face. I shook my head, pressing the towel against my neck. "You've got nothing to apologize for. You saved me from sitting alone on my porch during a thunderstorm." Her laugh was quiet, but it reached her eyes. She disappeared for a moment and returned with a blanket, draping it over my shoulders before settling one across her own. Then she moved to the kitchen, her steps unhurried but purposeful. The soft hiss of the kettle soon filled the silence, followed by the faint clink of teacups. I watched her from the doorway. Even in the simplest of movements, pouring water, stirring honey into the cups, there was a grace to her, a patience I had always admired. She carried the tea over carefully, placing one steaming mug in front of me before curling onto the couch with her own. For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain provided its own soundtrack, steady and relentless, as if the world outside had been reduced to water and wind. I wrapped my hands around the cup, the rising steam fogging my glasses slightly, and let the warmth seep into my skin. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's been a long time since I let anyone in here during a storm." Her words carried weight. She wasn't just talking about her living room. I looked at her then, really looked. The blanket draped around her shoulders, the way she curled into the corner of the couch, the vulnerability in her eyes that she couldn't quite mask. She had carried loss, I knew. She had built walls, not out of coldness, but survival. And now, somehow, I was here, sitting with her while those walls cracked just enough to let me see inside. "I don't want to be just your neighbor," I said quietly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Her eyes flickered, searching mine, and for a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then she set her cup down, leaned forward, and reached for my hand. Her fingers slipped into mine gently, testing at first, then holding with quiet strength. Her touch was warm, steadying, and something inside me settled. The hesitation, the fear, the constant question of should I or shouldn't I, it all seemed to fall away with that simple act of trust. "I haven't felt this alive in years," she admitted, her voice low but unwavering. "And it scares me, but it also feels right." I squeezed her hand, smiling softly. "It feels right to me too." She shifted closer then, until her shoulder rested against mine. We sat like that, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea as the storm raged on outside. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, but it was enough. The quiet acceptance, the closeness, the sense that something new had begun between us. By the time the rain eased and the thunder faded into the distance, her head had found its place on my shoulder, and my hand remained intertwined with hers. We didn't need words anymore. The silence said everything. The widow next door wasn't untouchable anymore, and neither of us was alone.